Imagine, just for a second, that you're sitting on your couch, just scrolling on your phone, and you're filling up an online shopping cart.
Right. Something we all do pretty much every week.
Yeah, exactly. So you toss in a new vacuum cleaner for the living room, maybe a winter coat, a bottle of shampoo, just normal, everyday stuff.
Just the basics, yeah.
But then, right next to the shampoo, you add a spool of fiber optic cable that's used for flying military drones and like a high-end thermal imaging site.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and maybe a two-way tactical radio? I mean, you hit purchase, you buy it all from the exact same website with a single tap, and it's scheduled for next day delivery.
Yeah, and putting it that way, it really highlights the absurdity of the situation. I mean, we are looking at a bizarre, totally unprecedented collision of everyday domestic life and, well, active warfare. And it's all happening on the same digital storefront.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is to explore how a civilian e-commerce giant, an app that millions of people use just to buy groceries and sneakers, essentially became a focal point in a major geopolitical conflict. Right, and we are pulling from a massive stack of incredibly detailed sources for this. We've got geopolitical analyses, institutional financial reports, widespread media coverage, and some really fascinating academic theses.
Yeah, and all of these texts analyze the rapidly shifting Russian e-commerce landscape leading right up to the summer of 2026.
Exactly. And just to set the stage for you listening, our objective today is strictly analytical. We are diving into the logistics, the economics, and the systemic vulnerabilities exposed in these documents.
Right. We're just looking objectively at what the sources state. We want to understand what actually happens to global, highly optimized supply chains when they are, placed under the extreme stress of a military conflict.
Okay, let's unpack this. We really need to start with the sheer, almost unimaginable scale of this e-commerce giant Wildberries. I mean, we are not just talking about a popular shopping website here.
No, not at all.
This is a platform that processes over 20 million orders every single day.
Yeah, which is just a staggering volume. To understand the gravity of that number, you really have to look at the market share.
Right.
The financial reports indicate that Wildberries controls roughly 45 to 47% of the entire domestic e-commerce market in Russia.
Almost half the market.
Exactly. And their closest competitor, Ozon, holds about 32%. So together, those two platforms alone monopolize nearly 80% of the market. But Wildberries is, by far, the undisputed heavyweight.
The financial footprint of that dominance is wild. I was reading through the turnover statistics in the reports, and we are looking at numbers exceeding 6 to 7 trillion rubles annually.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how that dominance accelerated, particularly after 2022.
Oh, right, with the sanctions.
Exactly. When major Western brands suddenly exited the Russian market, a massive vacuum opened up basically overnight. And Wildberries stepped right in and positioned itself as the ultimate conduit for what the industry calls parallel imports.
Right, parallel imports. So instead of a brand officially shipping their new smartphones directly to Moscow, a third-party seller steps in.
Yep.
They might buy a massive pallet of those smartphones in a place like Turkey or the United Arab Emirates, maybe Kazakhstan. They truck them across the border and just list them on Wildberries without the original brand's permission.
That is the exact mechanism, yeah. Wildberries essentially provided the frictionless infrastructure for that gray market to just explode.
Wow.
And because of that massive influx of goods, their turnover now accounts for roughly 3% of Russia's entire gross domestic product.
Wait, 3% of the entire GDP?
Yeah. Literally, 1 out of every 50 rubles moving through the entire Russian economy is flowing through this single platform.
That's insane.
It is. And to facilitate that kind of flow, they operate around 3 million square meters of physical warehouse space. And that's supported by over 45,000 neighborhood pickup points.
Which brings us to a recent development mentioned in the institutional analyses that I found really interesting. Wildberries recently merged with an outdoor advertising giant called Russ, creating this new corporate group called RVB.
Right, that was a huge deal.
Yeah, and this merger received explicit state approval. A few of our academic sources actually refer to this new merged entity as an algorithmic Gosplan.
Oh yeah, that term.
Yeah. For anyone unfamiliar with Soviet history, Gosplan was the state planning committee that tried to control the entire economy from the top down.
And the algorithmic Gosplan concept is just brilliant.
Okay.
Because, during the Soviet era, you had entire buildings full of bureaucrats trying to manually calculate exactly how many winter coats or pairs of shoes the population would need next winter.
Which was notoriously inefficient, right? It led to constant shortages.
Exactly. But today, Wildberries doesn't need bureaucrats. They use algorithms to predict consumer demand, they dynamically set prices, and they geographically distribute goods before people even know they want them.
That's wild.
The platform has effectively become a digital planned economy, driving civilian growth. It is, for all intents and purposes, a quasi-sovereign infrastructure.
It's as if Amazon, FedEx, and your local bank all merged into one giant purple corporation that the government just completely relies on to keep the population happy.
Pretty much, yeah.
But reading through these reports, I kept coming back to one fundamental question. Does being that large and that deeply integrated into the national economy actually make them too big to fail? Or does it just make them a massive, impossible-to-hide target?
Well, the events of this past summer proved it is overwhelmingly the latter. Their immense scale and that algorithmic efficiency we just discussed are entirely dependent on their physical, concrete infrastructure.
Right, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Yep.
In July 2026, over the course of just a few days, multiple logistics hubs belonging to Wildberries were hit by long-range drone strikes.
Yeah, this was a massive turning point.
We are talking about colossal mega warehouses in locations like Elektrostal, Ryazan, Krasnodar, and Novosibirsk.
And the physical devastation was immense. I mean, the analyses estimate these coordinated strikes knocked out roughly 10 to 15.4% of the company's entire warehouse network in just a matter of days.
Wow, 15%.
Yeah, that is up to 860,000 square meters of highly automated storage, sorting machinery and inventory, just completely destroyed.
To put that in perspective, just imagine a facility the size of several dozen professional football fields packed to the ceiling with goods just burning to the ground.
It's hard to even picture.
It is. But why target a civilian e-commerce warehouse in the first place? It goes back to that shopping cart we talked about in the beginning. Wildberries wasn't just selling civilian goods, right?
Right.
They were openly operating as an open-source supply line for dual-use items.
Exactly. And dual use meaning equipment that has legitimate civilian applications, like a hunter buying a thermal scope, or maybe a hiker buying a heavy-duty battery. But it is equally essential for military operations.
And the lists of recovered inventory in these reports are staggering. We're talking specialized two-way tactical radios, fiber optic cables specifically used for flying FPV drones, and even body armor plates.
Yeah, there was even a period where the platform featured a dedicated section explicitly labeled everything for the SMO, the special military operation.
Right out in the open.
Completely open. And because official state military procurement can be incredibly slow and bogged down by bureaucracy, individual military units, volunteer groups, and even soldiers' families heavily relied on these fast, efficient civilian platforms to procure vital frontline gear.
So because the military is actively utilizing a civilian app to crowdsource their radios and drone parts, opposing forces view these logistics hubs as entirely legitimate military targets that are actively supporting the war effort.
According to the sources, yes, exactly.
And some of these warehouse strikes took place 1,400 kilometers from the border. That is deep inside the country. But let me push back a bit on the strategic value of that. If Wildberries is just the middleman, the intermediary facilitating a transaction, how much real damage does hitting a warehouse actually do to the military supply lines on the front compared to the damage it does to the civilian economy back home?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the direct military impact, like delaying a shipment of radios, is perhaps secondary to the cascading systemic impact.
Okay.
Because the military is always the ultimate priority, right? We will inevitably find workarounds. The fatal flaw that these long-range strikes exposed is actually Wildberries' core civilian business model.
The actual mechanism of how they move 20 million packages a day?
Precisely that mechanism. To keep consumer costs incredibly low and delivery times unbelievably fast during peacetime, you have to build hyper-centralized logistics networks.
Right, you need scale.
Exactly. You construct these massive, highly automated mega hubs. Millions of products from a vast geographic region all funnel into one huge building. They get sorted by complex algorithmic machinery and get shipped out on synchronized trucks.
Think of it like a hub-and-spoke airline network. If you've ever flown during the holidays, you know the pain of this exact system.
Oh, yeah.
If a massive blizzard takes out the central hub at O'Hare in Chicago, your local short flight from Ohio to Indiana still gets canceled, even if the weather is perfectly sunny in both of those places.
It's the exact same principle.
Taking out one single mega warehouse paralyzes the regional hubs, places like Kazan or Rostov, because the massive flow of goods suddenly hits an impassable bottleneck. The algorithms just don't know how to route around a smoking crater.
That airline analogy perfectly illustrates the paralysis. Yeah. The supply chain was optimized entirely for speed and cost, not for resilience.
Right.
So when you lose 10 to 15% of your total processing capacity literally overnight, the remaining 85% of the network gets instantly overwhelmed by the backlog. Sorting lines back up, trucks sit idle in parking lots for days, and the whole algorithmic dance just grinds to a complete halt.
Which brings us to the great supply chain shift of 2026 that's detailed in the academic sources. These strikes are forcing a massive, incredibly expensive reevaluation of risk management across the entire sector.
Yeah, corporate boards are suddenly realizing that peak efficiency is now a fatal liability. They're being forced to radically decentralize their operations.
Right, spreading it out.
Exactly. Instead of building one massive 3 million square foot warehouse that acts as a single point of failure, you suddenly need 300,000 square foot warehouses spread out over hundreds of miles.
And the data shows that Ozon, the second largest player, naturally possessed a slightly more decentralized model, right? And they've proven a bit more resilient in the face of these disruptions.
They have, yeah. But decentralizing a supply chain on the fly like this isn't just about signing new commercial leases. It requires an astronomical capital investment.
Because you have to duplicate everything. Everything. You have to duplicate your inventory across 10 different sites. You need 10 times the physical security, 10 separate management teams, and multiple sets of imported automated sorting machinery. It fundamentally kills the exact cost efficiency that made these platforms so wildly profitable in the first place.
And that new overhead cost doesn't just vanish into the ether, does it?
No, of course not.
It gets aggressively passed down the chain. The platform raises storage fees for the sellers, they hike up commission rates, and ultimately that results in significantly higher prices for you, the consumer.
Absolutely.
Let's focus on those sellers for a moment, because those massive smoking craters we just talked about used to hold millions of individual items. And here's the kicker. None of those laptops, winter coats, or pet food bags actually belong to Wildberries.
And this is a crucial distinction that often gets lost in the headlines. Wildberries operates primarily as a marketplace.
Right, like Amazon third-party sellers. Exactly. The vast majority of the inventory sitting on those automated shelves legally belongs to independent sellers. We are talking about over 1 million small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, operating on this platform.
The financial devastation outlined in the banking reports is just heartbreaking. The estimated loss of goods in those strikes ranges from $1.3 billion to $1.87 billion US dollars.
And that number becomes even more catastrophic when you look at the demographic profile of who these sellers actually are.
Yeah, tell us about that.
The financial data indicates that the median revenue for a Wildberries seller is roughly $7,500 a year.
Wait, $7,500 for the entire year?
For the entire year, yeah. These are micro businesses. We were talking about individuals working out of their apartments, local families, regional craftsmen. They have zero financial cushion. Their entire business model is buying inventory, shipping it to the central warehouse, and waiting for the algorithm to sell it. If that inventory burns, they don't just lose their current stock, they simultaneously lose their future revenue, their ability to pay their debts, and basically all of their working capital.
They are completely, undeniably wiped out in an instant. And the initial response from the platform wasn't exactly supportive, was it?
Far from it. The legal analyses show that Wildberries had recently updated their seller contracts to include a highly specific force majeure clause that explicitly covered drone strikes.
You've got to be kidding me.
Nope. They essentially tried to legally shield themselves, telling the sellers, hey, if a drone hits the warehouse, we are not legally liable for your lost goods.
Imagine losing your entire livelihood and getting a corporate email pointing to a terms of service update. The reaction must have been explosive.
The public backlash was immense and immediate. Sellers took to social media in droves, posting videos of their ruined businesses and demanding accountability. It quickly spiraled into a massive public relations crisis for the company.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And following that intense pressure, the founder, Tatiana Kim, had to walk the policy back. She eventually promised to compensate 88,000 of the absolute smallest sellers on the platform.
But 88,000 out of over 1 million sellers still leaves hundreds of thousands of micro-businesses completely in the dark.
Exactly.
And we are already seeing the financial ripple effects hitting the broader banking sector. Sberbank, which is Russia's largest state-owned bank, reported that over 300 companies immediately requested emergency loan restructurings right after the July strikes.
Yeah.
The analysts are warning of a severe threat of mass bankruptcies rippling through the entire Russian retail sector.
And when you have hundreds of thousands of micro businesses suddenly unable to pay their business loans or their mortgages or their taxes, the entire supply chain just shudders.
It's all connected.
It is. It doesn't just stop at the individual seller. The local logistics company that transports their goods loses their contract, the cardboard packaging supplier loses an account, the local manufacturer shuts down. It is a massive domino effect.
My immediate thought reading that was, won't the Russian government just step in? They can't afford a massive economic crash in the middle class, right? Couldn't the state banks just bail these sellers out to keep the system moving?
Well, state-backed institutions like VTB and Sberbank could certainly step in with subsidized loans, tax deferrals, or direct cash injections. But there's a massive macroeconomic trap waiting for them if they do.
A trap? How so?
If the central bank pumps billions of rubles into the economy to bail out these small businesses, that money enters the money supply without any new physical goods being produced to match it. Remember, the goods just burn to ash.
Ah, so you have a massive influx of cash, but the shelves are still empty. Too much money chasing too few goods.
That is the literal textbook definition of inflation. Printing money to replace burned inventory directly accelerates the inflation rate.
And that's already a problem there.
Exactly. The Russian central bank has already been locked in a fierce battle against stubbornly high inflation, which is hovering around 6 to 7%, requiring them to maintain very high key interest rates.
Wow.
So the government is essentially caught in a lose-lose scenario. They either allow the mass bankruptcy of their merchant middle class, or they fuel an inflationary fire that hurts every single citizen in the country.
So what does this all mean? We have heard about strikes on oil refineries and energy infrastructure for years now. How is hitting a civilian e-commerce marketplace fundamentally different in its strategic impact?
This raises an important question, and it really highlights the shifting strategic thinking outlined in the geopolitical analyses. Let's look at the contrast. When a long-range drone hits a massive oil refinery, who actually feels the immediate pain of that strike?
The government's balance sheet, right. It hits the federal budget and export revenues.
Exactly that. The state has mechanisms, like domestic damping payments, to artificially stabilize fuel prices at the local pump. So, while a burning refinery severely hurts the state's wallet, the ordinary citizen living hundreds of miles away rarely feels a direct, immediate impact in their daily routine.
That makes sense.
But striking Wildberries, that is a direct, visceral hit to the middle class. One of the analysts in our reading stack perfectly summarized it, calling this a strike against loyalty, not against tanks.
A strike against loyalty, because suddenly the consequences of the war are sitting right there in your living room.
Precisely. The demographic data shows that 85 to 90% of the economically active population in Russia utilizes either Wildberries or Ozon.
That's almost everyone.
Pretty much. So when those central warehouses burn, everyday people experience the fallout immediately on their phones. They face sudden delayed deliveries. The winter coat they ordered for their child simply doesn't arrive. Everyday household goods are suddenly out of stock. And, as we discussed with the decentralization costs, consumer prices sharply rise as companies pass on the massive new costs of insurance and redundant logistics.
It completely disrupts the daily illusion of normalcy. If you can't buy your pet food, your shampoo, or a replacement charger for your phone without a massive delay or a price hike, you can no longer pretend that everything is perfectly fine.
It forces millions of ordinary citizens to intimately confront the economic costs and the everyday inconveniences associated with the continuation of the conflict.
Yeah.
It shifts the heavy burden of the war from the abstract, distant realm of federal budgets and military front lines directly onto the smartphones and into the physical wallets of the general population.
It really is a profound shift in how we have to think about strategic vulnerabilities in the 21st century. We started this deep dive talking about a digital shopping cart containing a vacuum cleaner and a drone cable, and we've seen how an app that you might just use to buy a pair of shoes actually represents 3% of a nation's GDP. It acts as a critical artery for wartime logistics, a financial lifeline for over 1 million small businesses, and a direct gauge for national inflation.
And for you listening, whether you are running a business or just ordering groceries online, this is a powerful lesson in modern economics and conflict.
Truly.
The global supply chains and massive logistical networks we rely on entirely for our daily convenience are no longer just standard business operations.
Yeah.
They are glaring, strategic national vulnerabilities. The same algorithms that predict what kind of shampoo you want to buy are now deeply intertwined with national security.
It really leaves you with a heavy thought to mull over. If civilian e-commerce platforms have become so unimaginably vital that they are essentially functioning as irreplaceable state infrastructure, the historical line between consumer goods and military logistics has permanently blurred.
It definitely has.
As we look to the future, you have to wonder, will a nation's security rely less on the traditional military forces they build and more on the algorithms, the warehouse workers, and the delivery drivers that keep their country running?
It is a complex reality that every modern nation and really every global supply chain manager is going to have to face head on.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a completely new perspective on the hidden logistical structures holding up the world around you. Keep questioning those structures, keep learning, and we will see you next time.